One side says it's been handled and nothing illegal happened. The other side says it's time for a legal challenge. We're going to look at the rift between state government and the city of Jacksonville. Downtown growth has been a priority for years. Will leaders eliminate a key tool in development and cut back on incentives? Plus, mid-decade redistricting, it is on the governor's agenda. Now he may have a court date, too. Chris Hand joins us to explain on This Week in Jacksonville. Glad you're with us. And today we're diving deep into some local and state topics. Government law attorney Chris Hand joins us for what we call Hand on Government. And Chris, let's start local here. James Uthmeyer's the Attorney General. He's subpoenaed Donna Deegan's administration here in Jacksonville and says the city may have impeded immigration enforcement. Where do we land on this? And we can get into some of the details here. It started after a staffer recorded a video in City Hall blasting immigration enforcement.
Well, Kent, yeah, as you say, this started when a City Hall staffer, a staffer in the mayor's office, recorded a video directed to presumably kind of the immigrant community, providing advice on sort of how they, should interact with ICE. She did tell people to sort of comply with any ICE officers, but there were also concerns raised because she talked about where ICE was deploying in Jacksonville. This became a subject of great controversy. The mayor's office put her on administrative leave, investigated the matter, and then restored her to duty. Now the Florida Attorney General's office is stepping in. They've issued a criminal subpoena for possible impeding of federal immigration officials. They've subpoenaed a lot of her communications and other things. So this is something we'll watch going forward. But the city has said it will comply with the subpoena while the mayor's office has kind of protested this as a political move. But again, the Attorney General does have subpoena power. The city is cooperating. So we'll have to see what the results of that subpoena are, what documents, if any, it produces and where it goes from there.
And I want to show you what Mayor Deegan's office released Monday after we learned of the subpoena. We got a statement from Mayor Deegan's office. It reads, in part, instead of addressing the pocketbook concerns of Floridians, including property insurance, housing costs, and health care, the Attorney General is once again on a hyper-partisan fishing expedition as we enter election season. The city of Jacksonville has received and will fully cooperate with the subpoena received from the Office of Statewide Prosecution. We are confident that a review of the facts will show the administration acted lawfully, as we always do. The mayor additionally has said that city staffer was disciplined, not for the contents of the message, but for the process, didn't go through proper channels to release that information. I guess at the end of the day, does it look like, and we haven't seen all that's been subpoenaed so far, those communications, does it look like the city or the city staff person could have been trying to, as the phrase is, impede immigration efforts?
Well, again, as you say, Kent, the documents will tell all, as they usually do, kind of in response to subpoenas. If you look at the video she recorded, which, as you say, was recorded from City Hall, which is, certainly discouraged. I mean, this is a taxpayer-funded position. But she did in the video kind of encourage people to comply with federal immigration officials to the extent they were stopped. I think the big question will be, did the comments she made about where kind of ICE agents might be deployed in town, does that rise to any sort of violation? On their face, they may not, but that's why the Attorney General has now asked for these additional documents. So once we see those, or once those become public, we'll have a better sense as to whether there is an issue here or not. Obviously, very different perspectives from the Attorney General and from the mayor. The Attorney General suspecting there could be a violation, the mayor's office vehemently denying that, saying they've looked into it and describing this as a hyper-partisan fishing expedition. This is not the first time there's been a clash between Tallahassee and Jacksonville, particularly between this Attorney General and this mayor. But again, I think now that the subpoena has been issued, documents will be produced. Once we see what those are, we'll have a better sense whether there's any there or not.
So you were chief of staff for Mayor Alvin Brown. Is this process something that's consistent, regardless who is in charge of City Hall, that, hey, communications go through a certain channel? Is this something that changes mayor to mayor?
It all goes back, President Grover Cleveland's statement that a public office is a public trust. When you are a public employee, a taxpayer-funded public employee, and when you're in an administration, you have to know that communications reflect on the mayor, on the city of Jacksonville. So there's always a process as to how communication should be done. In this situation, she was speaking about what is a very, controversial public subject right now. Traditionally, those would be subject to a process where if you're making communications, the problem is if you work for the mayor's office or for the city, whether or not you're speaking on your own behalf, the perception could be that you're speaking on behalf of the mayor or the city, which prefer to speak with one voice. So that's why there normally is a process for those kind of communications. It appears, and the mayor's office has said as much, that process was not followed in this case.
So I still want to talk City Hall, but we'll shift the locations a little bit. So you remember a year ago, the Federal Department of Government Efficiency, that all launched, and then in some ways has faded away with Elon Musk moving out of the limelight there. Florida has a DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency effort, and they had a report recently that raises some questions for City Council after this review of the Florida DOGE report on local government spending. Jacksonville City Council auditor says couldn't really conclusively identify what was charged or alleged as $199 million that the city spent wastefully.
Well, that's right, Ken. As you know, this Florida Department of Governmental Efficiency has been auditing local governments around the state for the last several months. They were here in Jacksonville not too long ago, a several-day site visit in which they, kind of audited different aspects of city operations. They came back with a report that was not particularly detailed, but a report that concluded that there was $200 million of wasteful spending at the city of Jacksonville. Now, to put this in some budget perspective, Kent, the city's overall general fund budget, its operating budget, is $2 billion. So the suggestion here is that there's 10% wasteful spending in this $2 billion budget. The Duval Doge Committee, which is a committee of the Jacksonville City Council, which has been looking at ways to make city government more efficient, took a look at this report and, even more importantly, gave it to the city council auditors to review, and there seems to be a bit of a difference of opinion. What the auditors found is that they could only account for 90 million of the 200 million that DOGE should identify. That doesn't mean they agree with that, but in terms of the numbers DOGE was using, the only math they could make work was 90 million. So Ron Salem, who chairs the Duval Doge Committee, has sent the council auditors' findings back to Florida DOGE and asked a series of questions about their findings, about the details behind those findings, to see if they can reconcile what seems to be at this point a pretty significant difference of opinion between the state of Florida and the city of Jacksonville.
Yeah, $100 million difference of opinion.
Right.
So last minute in this segment, and then we'll take a short break, but what comes out of this? Is there some kind of accountability that can be pushed from Tallahassee towards the city of Jacksonville?
Ken, I think what this is really geared toward is less that and more what it could be a property tax amendment on the November 2026 ballot. As you know, the governor has strongly advocated for a reduction in property taxes, particularly homestead property taxes. There are some initiatives moving through the Florida legislature right now to put a property tax proposition on the November ballot. I think it seems clear that a lot of this effort is being made to potentially identify wasteful spending in advance of a possible debate over the summer and the fall as to whether or not voters should cut property taxes as part of the Florida Constitution.
Legislative session is going on right now, and certainly what we're going to see in the last half of the session is they're going to be talking about budget. So stay with us, because even a school district in a county flush with revenue can have budget troubles. We're going to take a look at an A-rated district's trouble and see how that applies throughout our region. That's next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville with Kent Justice.
Government law attorney Chris Hand is with us for something we call Hand on Government. There's some questions mounting at City Hall in Jacksonville over incentives, downtown development incentives. Some Jacksonville City Council members are kind of challenging whether the expensive completion grants really remain necessary. And then we're hearing about Everbank, which is headquartered in downtown, saying, hey, we'd like to stay. We might need some incentive money to stay here.
Right. Kent, I mean, as you know, because over the last 10 to 15 years, the city has been focused on trying to revitalize downtown Jacksonville and has offered a series of economic development incentives for businesses to relocate downtown or locate for the first time there. And Everbank is now asking for some incentives to stay or retain its presence in downtown Jacksonville. This occurs amidst the backdrop of real debate on City Council and between Council and the Mayor's office as to whether downtown is kind of the pump's been primed enough so that city doesn't need to continue offering incentives, or if that tool is needed. And there are very different perspectives on that on City Council, and the special committee on the future of downtown is examining that question. There are some council members who are suggesting that, we've provided multiple completion grants at this point. I think now, Kent, when you do the math, there's more than $100 million of completion grants sort of that have been passed or on the table. Those are grants that come directly out of the city's operating budget. So at a time where, city officials are somewhat concerned about revenue going forward, that certainly attracts their attention. There's a school on the council that says, look, we've done enough to kind of prime the pump for downtown revitalization. It'll just take over organically at this point, and we don't need to do anything else. There's another school from the Downtown Investment Authority and some other council members who say, look, we still have to continue providing these incentives to kind of help encourage people to either come downtown or, in the case of Everbank, stay downtown. I suspect this conversation is going to head into some of the city's kind of budget discussions that will start in about 4 months or so. Yeah. They're going to have to weigh, are these downtown incentives providing enough return on investment to justify keeping them in what is an increasingly tight budget situation at City Hall?
Let me give you some of the examples. Recent major City of Jacksonville commitments include incentives, a $39 million completion grant for the South Bank Residential Tower, $25.8 million for the Shipyards Project and Four Seasons Hotel, $40 million community benefits agreement funding for East Side neighborhood grants. So those are just, again, some of the examples here.
Well, Ken, it's more than that. There's, a significant amount of money on the table for what's called the WJXT improvement. There's some other that's kind of in, kind of the western part of downtown. There's some more South Bank projects that are asking for completion grants. And again, the reason the completion grants are really significant is that's money right out of the city's pocket. There are other ways you incentivize projects like what's called a REV grant, where people just pay less in property taxes over time. But this is actual cash the city has to come up with when a project is done. So there are some council members concerned whether the city can afford that. Others saying, hey, can we afford not to do this if we want to continue downtown's growth?
I mentioned it before we went to a commercial break. I want to talk a little bit at St. Johns County School District, really bracing for the potential of a big budget gap next school year. District thinks it could have a deficit between $10 and $15 million for the 26-27 school year. This is an example of a county that is growing, has lots of revenue, but still, and an A-rated school district, still, there are tough choices for school districts all around us to try and make.
Kent, St. Johns County has one of the top-ranked, if not the top-ranked, public school district in the state. It's either the best funded or one of the best funded school districts in the state. But what they're going through, this potential $10 to $15 million deficit next year, is really emblematic of what public school districts around the state are facing right now due to a variety of pressures. Less money coming from Washington, which is affecting all sorts of local governments, but also some significant changes in state law. Remember that we now have a universal voucher program in the state of Florida where anyone can sort of take public dollars and use them at a private or a charter school instead of at a public school. And that has had a significant fiscal impact. It's about a $4 billion impact statewide, and has impacted places like St. Johns County that aren't receiving as much revenue from the state as they used to because of the universal voucher program. So what you see is places like St. Johns County and other school districts around the state trying to come up with ways to kind of fill those gaps in the midst of this new fiscal reality.
Yeah, it's something that not just St. John's, all of these different districts. We see businesses going through this in the wake of what happened with the pandemic. There are changes happening, and in this example, school districts have to figure out how to make those changes too. I don't want to shortchange this, but there was a task force on civil rights history that you were part of back in June 2018, and right now we're hearing that this new effort, Jacksonville, has been added to the U.S. Civil Rights Trail. and that's even going to happen the first stop this month in Jacksonville.
It's a very big deal. I mean, the U.S. Civil Rights Trail, very important way to kind of, bring attention to his civil rights locations across the country. Back on this task force on civil rights history that then City Council President Anna Brochet convened, I was honored to be a member of that commission, but it came up with a series of recommendations, one of which was to put Jacksonville in a position to be included in the U.S. Civil Rights History Trail. It's been a collective effort among kind of multiple mayor's office, city council. Visit Jacksonville CEO Michael Corrigan has been very involved. But now Jacksonville has established its own civil rights trail, which entitles it to inclusion on the U.S. civil rights history. So it's a really good story for Jacksonville. We have such a rich civil rights history here in Northeast Florida, both in Jacksonville and in St. Augustine. So this will help to make sure that we can continue to teach that history, tell those stories, make sure people understand the role that Jacksonville has had in the history of civil rights.
And on that education side, boy, history comes alive when you go to that site. This is where this event happened. It is something exciting. All right.
Exactly.
So I'm excited that we've got another segment we can talk, so stay with us. Governor Ron DeSantis, he sounds in favor of the idea. He also says it may not be a partisan issue because of the Supreme Court. We're talking about the latest battle over redistricting. That's next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville on Channel 4.
Chris Hand is with us. And Chris, more than a year we've been tracking this nationally, where different states are saying, hey, we're going to redistrict, and it's mid-decade redistricting. Maybe explain what that is. And Florida is planning on it here in just a couple of months.
Well, Kent, typically redistricting of, redrawing of congressional seats is done once every 10 years. We have
with the census, right?
Under the Constitution, we have the census once every 10 years, and then state legislatures are supposed to convene, do a redistricting based on that new census information that lasts until the next decade. That's the way it used to be done. Now we've seen an increasing number of what are called mid-cycle redistrictings, where legislatures are getting involved in the middle of the decade to redraw congressional lines. And it's really taken off significantly this year. It happened in Texas after President Trump suggested that the Texas legislature should do that. It then jumped to California, where there was a ballot proposition that has allowed California to redraw its district lines. We're seeing it happening in other states. Virginia is a state where it's happening as well. There are other states that are considering it. But one where the legislature is at least going to consider the issue is here in Florida. Earlier this year, Governor DeSantis called a special session of the legislature for late April, just when legislators thought they might be safe to go home at the end of the 60-day session. They're going to come back for a week-long session from April 20th to 24th to think about congressional redistricting. This has proven to be very controversial, this mid-cycle redistricting, because people see it in either one direction or the other as something to gain partisan advantage. Governor DeSantis denies that. He says that this is the result of a case pending before the U.S. Supreme Court that might result in changes to the Voting Rights Act, which could impact congressional lines. His opponents or critics have said, no, what you're clearly trying to do is draw more Republican seats here in Florida. It's not certain the legislature will act. He does have the power under the Florida Constitution.
He can call that special session.
He can call the special session. They also have the power to do what's called a gavel in and gavel out, where they gavel in the session and they immediately gavel it out. And the current House Speaker has previously done that with a DeSantis called special session. Or they could come up with a different idea. They could still move on congressional redistricting, but take a different approach than the governor might prefer. We don't know anything at this point except for the fact that the governor has called them into special session. The lawsuit that's been filed against him challenges...
That's what I wanted to bring up.
Yeah.
A couple of Florida voters, and they're backed by the National Redistricting Foundation. They filed this legal challenge against the governor.
Right, and their challenge is sort of basically arguing that what the governor has done is usurped legislative authority. Under our state constitution, the legislature has the power to handle, exclusive power to handle legislative redistricting, and also the power to handle congressional redistricting. The only role for the governor of any of that process is he does have a veto over the congressional map, which he exercised back in 2022, and they came back and drew new maps. Under the Florida Constitution, the governor does have the power to call the legislature into special session. What they do once they get there is ultimately up to them. So that is the subject of the lawsuit, saying that his call for a special session was illegal. We'll have to see how that litigation goes forward, but it does appear likely the legislature will be back in late April, and they'll have to make a decision at that point whether or not they're going to redraw seats for the second time in this decade, or whether they're going to leave well enough alone and allow the next process to play itself out in 2032.
So wanted to get to this topic. We had a little less than 2 minutes to discuss it, but there's sweeping healthcare bills that are going on that the legislature in Florida is looking at. And this kind of relates to the big federal legislation last year that the president called One Big Beautiful Bill. But the new rules could see some changes for Medicaid and SNAP recipients.
Well, that's right. As a result of the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, there's some restrictions now on who can receive SNAP, Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, or Medicaid funds, and the legislature is now moving some bills through the legislature to align with those new federal rules. But these health care bills do some other things as well. One potential change is eliminating what's called the certificate of need process for nursing homes and hospice facilities. Particularly if you live in places like St. Johns County or Clay County, you've probably noticed kind of the growth of hospital facilities over the last 5 or 10 years. That's because the old certificate of need process for hospitals and healthcare facilities was eliminated in 2019. In other words, under the old system, Kent, you had to get approval from the state, who had to say there's a need to build that facility there before you could do it. That process went away for hospitals. The legislature is now talking about taking it away from nursing homes and hospice facilities as well. A lot of controversy about that. On the one hand, with Florida growing, there's some suggestion there's a need. On the other hand, people are worried about a already existing healthcare workers shortage and whether this might actually make it worse.
Yeah. Well, as we watch what happens in the final half of the legislative session in Florida, we've timed it up, so you'll be back to talk with us right as the session concludes. We'll see what happens out of that. Chris, always appreciate your insights and getting to talk through these issues.
Thank you so much, Ken.
I'm Kent Justice. Thanks for watching on air on Channel 4 and the CW17. And then online, you find us at news4jax.com. Don't forget, we're streaming on News4JAX Plus. And I urge you to check out This Week in Jacksonville Business Edition. The episode this week of our podcast, we're looking at the forecast for 2026 in the construction industry. Scott Brannick from the Northeast Florida Builders Association is our guest.
Why every day more people are choosing News4JAX, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.